Welcome back, everyone. We're so glad you're joining us for the second day of our statewide conference. My name is Thomas Carney, and I am a board member from New York City / Westchester region, representing the Borough of Queens. We have an exciting afternoon for you. At 1:15, we will hold the Commissioner's Forum with Ted Kastner, the Commissioner of OPWDD. During this event, board members will ask him questions about important issues, and then self-advocates will have a chance to ask questions. We will have a break at 2:50, and at 2:25, Carl Gresser will lead a workshop called You Have a Say in Your Life. And we will wrap up at 3:25 and take a break until we come back together at 6. Have a great day today.
Okay, thank you. All right, that was great. Well, now we're gonna have the commissioners forum, and the way this is gonna work, guys, is the commissioner is gonna speak. The board members will ask some questions first, and then we will open it up for you guys to ask some questions. But I will moderate, which means there will be a queue, and we will get to as many people as possible. We most likely won't get to everybody. It doesn't mean that we don't appreciate your participation and question. We just don't have the time to get to everybody. But you can put it in the chat, or you could even contact anyone that is presenting to ask them at a later time, because we will be making note of those things. So now I want to give it off to Chester Finn.
You're muted, Chester.
Yep, you're muted, Chester. We can't hear you.
We cannot hear you yet. Chester, is the Zoom acting up and it's not able to, not able to find the spot to unmute it?
I guess
Little technical difficulties.
And that happens. That's okay. We'll roll with it. We're self-advocates. We know how to deal with situations we're not used to. So.
Ted, do you want me to give you a call? Just shake your head and I can call you.
That's a good idea, Cynthia, and then we can hear Chester over your phone.
Okay,
Okay.
there you go.
Hello, my name is Chester Finn. I'm an advisor to the Self-Advocacy Association. And I'm also works for OPWDD as an individual and family advocate for New York State. This afternoon, it's my pleasure to introduce the commissioner, also my boss, Theodore Kastner. But before I turn it over to him, I would like to say, in this time of COVID, I had some concerns about Black Lives Matter and how that affects the agency and individuals. So I sent an email to the leadership team, and the commissioner responded. And actually, we had a meeting about this at OPWDD. We both had our masks on, but I thought that that was responding to individuals, and that shows that the commissioner listens. He might not always do what we want him to do, but he listens. So now it's my great pleasure to introduce Commissioner Theodore Kastner.
Well, thank you, Chester, for that invitation and introduction. And thank you, Thomas and Michael, also for your introductions. And I just want to thank Arnold and BJ for inviting me to participate in today's conference. I'll try to keep my comments brief so that there's a lot of time for questions and answers. But obviously, COVID has had a major impact on our delivery system. It's affected us in two ways. The first is we've never had to manage through a pandemic. We've had to analyze and understand new challenges, to learn new things, to deploy them in the uncertain and ever-changing environment that we've been in. And that's been difficult, as I'm sure you all know. And I think COVID has also exposed some of the weaknesses in our system and areas that we need to work on improvement. And we'll talk briefly about things, but we're going to be looking at our scope of services, the portfolio that we have, where we need to be emphasizing investments. We will also have to be dealing with some budget cuts and potentially looking at where we have to take some savings out of our system. And we'll talk more about that in a bit, but I just wanted to kind of take a step back and reinforce that the immediate impact of COVID is represented by the fact that we've had 4,452 people with disabilities who have become infected with the virus. And of that number, 488 have died. Thousands of DSPs have also been infected, and numerous staff have also died as a result. Every person who's gone had an individual story. They had family, friends, they had hopes and plans. There's no way that I can express my sadness for the loss of all of the individuals and their staff. And there's no way that I can express the gratitude I have to all of you who've worked so hard to make our response as effective as it's been. And I have no doubt that what we did in the last 6 to 8 months saved hundreds of lives and prevented the loss of more people. I want to thank you for all that you've done to help us, and hopefully we'll get through this second wave of the pandemic, and we'll be able to be talking about how we can access vaccine at some point in the near future. But I want to assure you, in the meantime, we're going to be doing everything possible to ensure that we are protecting the health and safety of all of our individuals, their families, and our workers. In terms of COVID and our response, our first experience with COVID happened around March 11th, when we identified our first individual who was suspected of being infected with COVID. We rapidly responded. We closed all of our day programs, as I'm sure you're aware, on March 18th. We restricted visitation and community outings in our residential programs on March 24th. These were all done in the hope that we could contain the virus, that we could protect our individuals and staff. And as I said, I think it's been largely effective. I'm glad that we've been able to reopen day programs and reopen our residential programs and allow more visitation. But there are still challenges around how staff can access PPE, how we're tracking and reporting data, visitation and community outings and things of that type. We have begun to experience hotspots in New York State, and within the last 2 weeks, these have really emerged as a widespread community pandemic, again, with infection rates that are up near 2 and 3% and 4% of the population. This is going to require that we continue to be vigilant and respond as quickly as we can to try to help contain the virus and to support and protect our individuals and their families and staff. It's also going to have a serious impact on our budget. Some of you may have heard that New York State anticipates a $16 billion budget deficit in the next fiscal year, which begins on April 1st. It's also estimated that that deficit could be as much as $62 billion over the next 4 years. Just to keep things in perspective, our total budget is about $9.5 billion a year. In response to that budget shortfall, we're going to be asked to look at trying to save about 5% of our to reduce spending. And that's going to have a significant impact on, again, the way our service system is built and how it looks. In the meantime,
You're
Commissioner-
muted.
Muted, Dr. Kastner.
that's funny. Okay, but as we are working through our budget and we're working through our plans to participate in the vaccine distribution, I want you all to continue to take care of yourselves, to engage in social distancing when possible. When you are interacting with folks, to wear a mask, to wash your hands. This year in particular, it's really important to get a flu shot so that you can protect yourselves against flu, which does cause 20 to 50,000 deaths per year in the United States. And hopefully we can work together and try to get through this, which we hope will be the last wave of COVID, and position ourselves for some success in the next budget cycle. So let me stop at this point and we can go on to your questions, and hopefully I can give you some response that'll help you.
Okay, thank you very much. First is our board. So we're gonna start out with BJ.
Hello, Commissioner. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you too, BJ.
Thank you for being here. My question is, many self-advocates view your role as advocating for them when you talk to New York State. Can you tell us what you think your role is now and in the future working with self-advocates, please?
Well, I really value our self-advocates. I really value the self-direction program. You may be aware that over the past year, we were asked to reduce funding for OPWDD by about 2%. And initially we were asked to look at an across the board cut, which would have reduced self-direction, the family support programs, and services like ComHab by 2%. We went through our budget on a line-by-line basis. We tried to prioritize and focus on areas where we could minimize the impact of budget cuts on people with disabilities. We eventually settled on 3 strategies which focus primarily on residential service providers. We did not make any cuts in self-direction. And in fact, as we responded to COVID, we facilitated enrollment in self-direction. We added about 1,000 people between April 1st and July 1st. We're on track to add about 4,000 people this year, which would be about 20% growth in self-direction. It would get our total up to about 23 or 24,000 people participating. And that expansion actually of self-direction is going to cost us about $150 million in this fiscal year. It's something that we believe is very important. We value it. We're continuing to make investments in self-direction during the course of this year. We hope that we can avoid any cuts to self-direction as we look at the 5% cut that we have to implement in April 1st. So I think, we've really tried to do the best we can to support our individuals and the flexibility and choice that you all require to live the lives that you want. It's a challenge, but we're going to need your help in the next 3 or 4 months as we look at our budget and establish priorities, and in some cases have to negotiate with our providers about where cuts are going to fall. I hope that's helpful to you in terms of a response.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. That was helpful. Next is Colleen Mackin, a fellow board member.
Hello, Commissioner. Nice seeing you again. We are still hearing about a lot about managed care, but don't know what is happening yet. So far, no one from AOPWDD or New York State has been able to tell us that managed care will really work and that it will not take no money away from services. We do not believe that managed care should move forward until these questions are answered the right way. Do you have any answers for these questions? And thanks for taking time to answer me.
Sure. Well, I'll start by saying that, I have some background in managed care, and I think I was brought into my role because I could bring experience and knowledge to a discussion on the role of managed care in our system. We know that our actuaries, Deloitte, have estimated that if we move to managed care, it will cost about $200 million per year more than we currently spend. We've also been told by the actuaries that the implementation of managed care would be associated with a one-time cost of about $500 million. So already it seems difficult for me to understand why we would go into managed care if it's going to cost. Now we've been lucky and fortunate that we have a demonstration project that we can look at and draw some lessons from. As you probably know, Partners Health Plan has been running a FIDA IDD demonstration, and their goal was to pilot managed care and then to be able to tell us how it worked. We looked at the performance of the FIDA, and just as the actuaries predicted, it does cost more to deliver services through managed care than it does traditionally through OPWDD. Last year, in 2019, Partners Health Plan spent 9.5% more on services than it would have cost OPWDD to deliver those services in its current model. And in addition, there were probably 7 or 8% costs associated with administration. So the FIDA is telling us that it's costing 15, 16% more to deliver services through managed care than it would if it was delivered under the traditional OPWDD model. We also looked at the quality of managed care services, and the results of the FIDA indicate that there really are no significant differences, better or worse, in terms of the services received by people enrolled in the FIDA. So based on the fact that it would cost more and doesn't seem to have improved quality, I'm not a huge proponent of our efforts to move to managed care. OPWDD has been very quiet on the issue because right now it's really subject to a review at the level of the chamber and the division of the budget. As you can imagine, if we are being asked to reduce our overall spending by 5%, it would be even more challenging if we had to go in and ask for an additional $200 million to satisfy the concerns of the actuary. I don't believe we're going to put a request for additional monies into our budget to support managed care, particularly when we have to look at potential cuts to services that people need right now. So we're not saying anything because there's not much to say, but if our actions are any indication, we're not doing very much with managed care. As you know, we've been sitting on the qualification document for, well, just about 2 years now without any feedback on the the last round of public comments. So we're not saying anything, but that may address your concerns.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
Thank you very
Up
much.
Is Robert Bounce. You are muted, Robert.
Robert's
I was
here.
on the screen.
Ah, hey,
Hi, Robert.
Are you ready for a question?
Yep. We're ready for the
Okay, go ahead.
the virus has impacted everyone, but the financial impact is a growing concern for self-advocates here in New York State. We are concerned about the impacts of withholds and cuts to services for people with development disabilities, specifically with regards to withholds or cuts that affect self-directed services and traditional services. This directly impacts self-advocates' ability to fairly pay direct service providers a fair wage so we can hire and maintain quality staff. With minimum wage increasing, the value of our staff continues to decrease, which is a major problem for us trying to live our best lives. Our programs need more funding, and now it seems we are in jeopardy of losing funding. Does OPWDD have a future plan for the changing dynamics of the New York State budget in regards to providing quality services across all avenues?
Thanks, Robert. That's a great question. So let me go back and say that I think self-advocates should be very happy with what we've done with our budget so far. We entered this fiscal year with a requirement that we reduce spending by 2%. We looked at our overall portfolio. We decided that we prioritize things in a certain way. We wanted to protect all services. We wanted to not take cuts from DSPs because we had just gotten funding to increase their salaries by 4%. And we wanted to maximize the revenue that we had by obtaining every federal match, every federal dollar that we could to match our Medicaid program. And so, as I said earlier, we reduced funding for certain residential support. We never touched our self-direction program, our family support centers, and we've actually grown self-direction by about 20% this year. The withhold is not a cut. The withhold is a cash flow management strategy that the division of the budget required of all state agencies. Every state agency was told that the division of the budget would not process receipts at 100%, that they would only process those receipts at 80%. But it only affected those funds that were distributed to local assistance programs. They didn't include Medicaid. They didn't include programs that were billed under our eMedNI program. And we went back to the division of the budget and we actually got some programs removed from that withhold. It does not include rent subsidies, for example. It doesn't include state operated family care. So we've tried to be effective advocates of not withholding funds, but again, these are withholds. They're not cuts. We've told the division of the budget that we think our providers should be made whole, that funds that have been withheld should be paid to our providers. And if they're going to make cuts, we'll have that discussion separate. So we're advocating as best we can for those withhold funds to be reinvested and returned to our providers. Now, there's a question which is related to yours. It's come up on the chat about 50% cut to residential provider rates. Just to be specific, we cut 3 parts of our residential provider rates, if you will. The first was providers were paid to maintain homes that were vacant. Okay, if someone left a home on a permanent basis, OPWDD continued to pay for that home, even though there was nobody there. And those homes would sit sometimes more than a year as vacant. No one was served with those resources. We eliminated funding for those vacancy payments, for those vacant residential settings. And I felt very good about that because it didn't take services from anyone. We also reduced funding for what were called retainer days and therapeutic leave days. Now, retainer days pay agencies or residential providers for when the individual has to be in the hospital or has to go to a nursing home and is expected to return. The idea of a retainer payment is so the agency can keep its staff, retain its staff, while the individual is out on a short-term basis. Providers receive about 2 weeks or 14 days of retainer payment for each individual each year. And those rates, they were paid at 100% of the residential provider's rate. We reduced the rate from 100% to 50%. But that only affects providers who are supporting individuals while that individual is in the home. Okay. There's a similar support called therapeutic leave, which allowed us to pay, providers 100% of their daily rate when individuals went home or went on vacation or otherwise left the group home. That was never capped before. We capped that at 96 days per year. And we also reduced the reimbursement to 50%. Now, we could reverse that cut. We would have to make a cut somewhere else. We just went through this process with all of our advocates, families, individuals, providers, all of our stakeholders to try to find places to make reductions that wouldn't affect services, that wouldn't cut DSP salaries, and that would maximize dollars. We think we did that. And we think we were pretty successful in minimizing the negative impact of a 2% reduction. If we had to restore those reductions in therapeutic leave or vacancies or retainer days, we would make cuts somewhere else because we're obligated under the law to create the budget that meets with the state's fiscal plan. And that would put self-directed services, ComHab, family support services, and everything else back on the table, potentially subject to a cut. So while none of us are happy about having to make cuts, we think that we did make those cuts in a way that minimized their negative impact on our system. And certainly from the perspective of self-advocates, minimized any impact on people with disabilities themselves. Our providers have come back and said specific people were harmed by those cuts, but they have not been able to identify a single person who was deprived of services as a result of those cuts. No one suffered any adverse result as a result.
Thank you for that explanation. Next, we're going to move on to Chris Wiseman.
Hold up, I'm trying to find the question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
All right, just making sure. LSD should be a partnership. How can OEW CD partner with Sandy's to advocate for us?
Well, thank you for the question. We have a large group of stakeholders that meet with us to provide us with information and their perspectives on how we're doing, on what we should be making investments in, what I consider reductions. You know, BJ, Arnold, and I hope many of you have a chance to participate in those events. We're listening, we're incorporating what you tell us into our plan. And I think there's no better evidence of that than the fact that while we had to make a 2% reduction in our overall spending this year, we actually made a 20% investment in self-direction. We've always invested in self-direction. My hope is that we can continue to do that. I will tell you now, because we're not gonna have this discussion in the next 6 months, but it could be a year or 2 years. We are going to be challenged at some point in the future by the fact that self-direction is so popular. That every year we're adding, 3, 4, 5,000 people to the program. Every year the costs are increasing by 100 million, probably going to be 150 million this year. We don't have new funds to do that. We're taking those funds out of other parts of our system to make those investments. And that kind of growth may not be sustainable with the level of the PRAs that we currently fund. At some point, whether it's 6 or 12 or 24 months, there'll have to be a discussion about the scope of self-direction and what it can afford to do, given how many people want to be supported through that model. But right now, I think we've done a pretty good job supporting self-advocates. There's an open door. We have a regular dialogue, and we're going to be incorporating your thinking into the next budget cycle, which will probably focus more on residential providers than on folks in self-direction.
Okay, thank you. We are going to go over our ground rules, then we're going to open it up to questions, but we're going to go over the ground rules a little bit first. Okay, so as I said in the beginning, we want to stay muted when we're not speaking. We will put people on mute to deal with extra sound. Press *6 on your phone to mute and *6 to unmute. To raise your hand, you want to press *9, and to put it down, you press *9 again. We want to give everybody a chance to speak, so we probably won't get to you a second time. We have people in the queue. There are a lot of people in the queue. So if we don't get to everybody, don't get offended or anything like that. We just, we run out of time. We got to keep on schedule. So the first person I'm trying to get to here. Let's see. The first person is John M. Or Joe M.
Joe M.
John M. Joe M.
How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks, Joe.
I have a question. My question is, do you think the economy is going to come back, that people could come back in person, like people could go back to work, and like people like us, like staff too?
So the general feeling is that the economy will recover, although it's going to take longer than I think we all hope. It's not going to be a quick rebound, but it looks like something that's going to take 2, 3, 4 years to recover. And that's one of the reasons we're concerned about the budget, is that state revenues might be depressed for as long as 4 years. On the other hand, you probably are aware that there are vaccines that are close to being approved. It's very likely that 2 COVID vaccines will be approved within the next couple of weeks, and that people will be able to get access to vaccination within the next 6 to 7 months or so. And that is really good news for people with disabilities, because it will allow us to moderate the kind of stringent public health measures that we've put into place. It would allow us to open the economy, to open our group homes, and allow folks to be out in the community more than we currently do. Now, personally, I'm going to continue to wear a mask because I don't find it a challenge, and I think it protects me and protects other people. But I think all of us should feel pretty good about our prospects if we can just get through the next 6 months. So I know, don't give up hope. We will get to a vaccine quickly, and we'll get there hopefully all together. So thanks for the question, Joe.
Thanks.
Okay, next up is Sean Stevenson.
Good afternoon, Commissioner. I just have one question. Whenever we get our normal staff back into our houses that have COVID, and that we're getting other staff in that have COVID. And I'm positive. I got tested. And I'm in one of your houses, Commissioner.
Okay, Sean, I don't know if I heard a question. Can you just repeat the question for me?
So our staff have been going to these houses that have COVID, and we're getting the staff that have COVID into the group homes in the Western New York area. And my question is, how come that we can have our normal staff that don't have COVID that know us? That we're getting these other staff in that do have COVID. So I'm positive because of that.
Yeah, I don't know the specific details of where you live or whether it's state operated or voluntary.
It's
state operated. But I still, yeah, okay. But I don't know enough about how your home is staffed. I can tell you that when SO state operated is looking at staffing, we're trying to allocate our staff in a way that is going to protect our individuals as much as possible. That means we are quarantining staff who are infected or may be exposed. I've been strongly encouraging state operations to quarantine staff if they are exposed to persons who are infected with COVID, because we don't want asymptomatic staff to be spreading the virus. So we've been very careful and cautious about how we allocate staff, and that may be what's affected the specific people who are typically involved in providing your care. That's about all I could say. I'm sorry, I can't be more specific.
Okay, thank you, Sean. Next up is Jessica Campbell.
Hi, Doctor. My name is Jessica. Sorry. And I actually one of the question I have with you is actually I'm on a board of directors for a provider agency on Long Island, and the question is, because we've been talking a lot about budgets, the question is, what is your plan on correcting the problems they're having with self-direction budget cuts, as well as the 20% budget cuts, as well as the therapeutic leave?
Well, thank you, Jessica. First of all, I want to tell you there were no cuts to self-direction.
Okay, I just want to clarify that.
There were
one of my
none.
worries.
Yeah, there were none, and it's my hope that in our next cycle of budgeting, we won't need to make cuts in our self-direction program. As I said, we focused our cuts on trying to avoid any reduction in services, avoid cutting any salaries, and trying to maximize our federal reimbursement. Given what we did, which was to eliminate funding for vacant, unoccupied residential settings, and the reductions in both the retainer days and therapeutic leave, I'm pretty comfortable that we did not withdraw services from anyone, and that we did not reduce the funding that we'd made available to support DSP salary increases. I think, I'm very proud of what our budget people did and accomplished in this last round. It's going to be very difficult to achieve that again in April when we have to implement a new budget. It points to major kind of philosophical questions about where we want to make investments and where we can't continue to support our current level investment. If we had to cut 5%, one approach would be to take 5% from every program, self-direction and family support services, in addition to residential and day program. My hope is that we could find a way not to reduce self-direction, which would mean that the cuts would fall disproportionately on residential providers and day program providers. But we have to make a cut, and we'll be meeting with our residential providers to talk about new strategies to fund them, a new methodology which would be focused on providing funding at the level of the individual's needs, which would be an acuity-based approach, as opposed to right now, which is a cost-based approach. we provide funding to providers based on how much it costs them to provide services. And that's not necessarily consistent with the needs of the individual. So we're going to be looking at our residential payment model over the next 6 months and hopefully negotiating with our residential providers about a new waiver submission that would go in the fall, go in the spring for implementation in the fall of 2021. So
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that.
yeah, we haven't cut self-direction. We've actually grown the program 20% per year. Our hope is that we don't make cuts in self-direction, but keep in mind, it can't grow 20% a year every year without our beginning to look at how we can sustain it. There's no way we can sustain a program growing at 20% a year.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Next up is Ed Palumbo.
Hello, Commissioner, and thank you very much for coming, and thank you very much for fighting for us. My my question will be like in a devil's advocate, okay? The first one actually is, when we grow the self-direction, is there gonna be like a waiting list? The second one now, what happens if our self-direction staff quits and we have no, let's say in the future, we have no funding, to hire a new staff? Are we going to be on our own?
Well, thanks, Edward. So as I've been saying, we're not, we didn't make any cuts in self-direction. We actually increased the number of folks who are participating in self-direction by about 20%. It's my hope that in the next budget cycle, which will begin in April, we won't make any reductions to self-direction and that we can actually continue to support its growth. But as I did say, I think there's a point in a year or next 2 years where we need to talk about what self-direction can reasonably accomplish given the constraints that we have on our budget. There's no way anything can keep growing at 20% a year when we don't receive any funding at all to expand it. I can't really comment as to your question about how you and your staff relate. It's my hope that you'll have sufficient funds to be able to support your staff. But I think you'd work with your fiscal intermediary and support broker to identify specific staff to work with you. So I hope that answers your question.
One more thing. Would that mean that you will be creating a waiting list for self-direction?
Oh, that's a good question. We don't have the ability to have a waiting list for self-direction. As part of our waiver, we are required to make the program available to anyone who wants it. So unless we were planning to go to the feds and put a cap on self-direction, we can't have a waiting list. Now, I'm not saying that in a year or 2 years, this might not be a topic for discussion, but right now it's not. We, by law, can't have a waiting list. So self-direction continues to grow, while at the same time we can effectively put a cap on residential growth. So we actually have more flexibility with our residential portfolio than we do with self-direction.
All right, thank you. Next up is Christy Glant.
Yes, my question was, I don't know if you know the question to this, but do you know if we're getting another stimulus check?
I think you're referring to the CARES Act and funds that were available through the federal government. It's my understanding that that authority has ended and it is the subject of negotiation with Congress. There is a proposal being floated between the Senate and the House in terms of a new set of stimulus opportunities, but I'm not, aware of the details of that. So you're talking about something that came through the federal government, which really have no control over, although we watch and we hope that there will be support for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next up is Steve Barsh.
How you doing, Commissioner? How are you doing today? I had a
Hi,
question.
Steve.
In supported residential or all resident, is that gonna be like cut through the board? Like 20%, 50% of the budget next year?
Well, we have to implement some reduction. There's a lot of different ways to do that. We could do a 5% across the board, which would cut everything by 5%. All of residential, all self-direction, all of family support services. And personally, I don't think that that's a good way to approach budgeting because it doesn't allow you to make investments in programs that you want to grow and support, like self-direction. So when we approached the budget this year, we focused on residential. My guess is that we'll be looking very carefully at residential next year. In particular, there are several reasons to do that. The first is that we have a payment methodology called high needs funding for residential providers that's supposed to support individuals with significant needs. The authority for that payment model ends in July. We're going to try to get it extended to October. But the point is, we have to come up with a new payment methodology.
All right, thank you so much.
Yeah, but I'm not done. So providers tell us that they don't get enough money to support people with high needs. So we may be moving from this current system, which is cost-based reimbursement, to a system that is acuity-based, where a provider would be paid more for taking care of someone with greater needs and less for someone with lesser needs. And before I end, I just want to say, we have a portfolio of residential services. We have a range of options for residential. We have ICFs, we have certified IRAs, we have supported living, and we have family care. We need to be looking at what individuals might be better supported in a setting like family care or in their own apartment or in their own home instead of a certified IRA. IRAs cost 4 or 5 times more than family care or than housing through apartments. If we can find individuals who would benefit from living with another family or living in their own home or apartment and use that to reduce the need for certified IRAs, we can actually save money, but preserve the same level of access to residential services that we currently have.
Thank you.
Okay, next up we have Becky.
Hi, Commissioner.
Hi,
My
Becky.
question is, a lot of my peers have been asking, when are we going back to day hab? They've been asking that for months. And I'm just wondering if you have any idea when that could be.
So as a matter of policy, at the level of where I sit, we have lifted the closure order on day programs. We have not implemented an order to close day programs. They were reopened earlier this year. Now, that doesn't mean that every provider decided to reopen. Some providers decided to close their programs permanently. Some providers decided to reopen, but with a lesser capacity than what they previously had. Some providers are transitioning to day program without walls, and some individuals are transitioning from traditional services to self-directed services. So we no longer have closed day programs, but that doesn't mean that they've all reopened, and certainly doesn't mean that we have the same capacity that we used to. To make it even more complicated, the state has this hotspot, COVID hotspot designation where they've got areas that are red and areas that are orange and areas that are yellow. And depending on if a day program falls in a hotspot, it may be required to close by order of the Department of Health for a short period of time. So it's kind of a moving target as to which day programs are open or closed. I think the questions you have are better answered by the specific day program provider. Their their ability to support you is going to vary over time and reflect the decision that they would make on their own. Does that help you?
Yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you.
Okay. All right, thank you. Next up, we have Sam Mattle.
Hi, Commissioner. I'm Sam Mattle. I'm the Executive Director of the Center for Self-Advocacy.
Hi, Sam.
And my question is this. When people with developmental disabilities are successful in getting a job and they get a roommate to split the cost, and then they find out that they're over the low income limit for housing and they are asked to leave, there are no accessible apartments for non-low income people with disabilities to move into. The rate of an apartment today is $1,800 a month in Western New York, and probably that is around the region as well. I believe OPWDD should look at ISS to reevaluate how they support people with developmental disabilities that are not low income.
I appreciate your question, Sam. I think I understood it. I think the point you're trying to make is that OPWDD shouldn't penalize people who've been successful in getting employment and becoming more independent. And I completely agree with that perspective. I don't know enough about the housing program that you're describing. I'll need to talk to Arnold and BJ and hopefully, with you about what we can do to try to fix that, because we don't want to penalize people who've been successful, who've actually accomplished the goal of getting a job. Be a terrible choice to make between, keeping your job or keeping your apartment. So we don't want to put people in that position. That seems completely unreasonable. So I want to follow through up on that because it's something we need to avoid in the future. Thanks for bringing that up.
Great question, Sam. Next up is, I think it's Brendan Klein.
Hello, Ed. I think we met each other last year in Albany for the same thing in Albany in person without COVID. I have a few questions. One, how will the budget cut affect our services and how can we stop them? Two, can you explain who will get the COVID vaccine first? Three, what do you see from next year with COVID and where we will end up?
It's nice to see you again, Brendan. Thanks for your questions. We have no choice as to, our overall budget. The amount of money we receive is determined by the negotiation between the governor's office and the legislature. And when the budget is passed, it has the force of law that compels us to operate within the budget. If the legislature and the governor agreed to pay more, to give OPWDD more money for services, then we would have more money. So the way to address the budget is through advocacy with the legislature and the governor's office. But once it comes down to us with a requirement that we meet a certain fiscal target, then that's what we have to do. And it looks like we're going to have to make a 5% reduction in our services next year. The vaccine is an interesting question. As you know, there are two vaccines that have been referred to the Food and Drug Administration for consideration for emergency approval. One is by Pfizer, the other is by Moderna. They are likely to be approved in the next week or 10 days. And New York is going to receive an allocation of those vaccines. I read in the New York Times today that, New York City may get about 480,000 doses, and the rest of the state, another 170, 180,000. I can't remember exact number. But combined, those allocations would only be sufficient to support about 300,000 people, because each person who receives the vaccine needs 2 doses. And there are a lot of people in New York. There's 20 million, so 300,000 doesn't go very far. Yesterday, the Centers for Disease Control Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices, or ACIP, met to create a recommendation for which groups of people would be a priority in receiving a vaccine.
Just so you know, I just communicated with Sean. I made a request, and you might want to.
So the ACIP recommendation was that individuals living in congregate care settings are the highest priority. And that would include, I believe, people in nursing homes, subacute rehab facilities, and potentially certified facilities that are operated in New York by OPWDD. We are today in the process of communicating with Chamber and the Governor's office to help understand if they will include our certified residential settings in that congregate care facility designation. We believe that the group of folks who live in certified settings have borne the majority of the burden of COVID infection. The majority of the individuals we lost were folks living in certified residential. We want to ensure that that group has access to the vaccine as soon as possible. But of course, that only represents about 35,000 of our individuals, and we support 120 to 140 individuals in different ways. So it's not clear to me that all of our individuals will have access to the vaccine as the highest priority group, but that a good portion of our individuals might fall into a category that would include individuals with chronic illness or individuals who are 65 years or older. So anyway, that whole topic is currently being hotly debated today inside the governor's office, and we are pushing to incorporate all of our folks in residential services as candidates for a vaccine as early as possible.
All right, thank you. We are at the end of our forum.
Thank you.
For those of you that didn't get a chance to ask your question, verbally or vocally, you can put it in the chat and we will make note of that, okay? So we want to thank the commissioner for coming on. So thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you. You're all waving to me. Thank you very much. You're so sweet. It's nice to see you all.
You as well.
That means applause in sign language.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I look forward to talking to you again.
Okay.
Bye, Commissioner.